I want to talk about one of the books I just recently finished, and it is called The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe. Now, you may recognize the title because in the 1980s there was a movie called The Right Stuff, and it was based off this book. But for those who have never seen the movie or read the book, let me talk about this for a second. To start off with, I gave this 4 stars because the readability is very good, the story is captivating, the writing is great, and there are so many good aspects to this book that I think that should be remembered because of the heroics that all of these men did in this time period, and they should be remembered. Now, there are 2 themes that run through this book. The first one is just how important test pilots are, and the other one is the importance of the space race, because this book is more on the space race than space exploration. Now, test pilots were the backbone of NASA. The most famous one was Chuck Yeager, who broke the sound barrier in 1947. And after that, these rockets end up getting larger and larger, and they go higher and higher into the atmosphere. And they provide a lot of data and research for NASA for the development of the Redstone and the Atlas and the Apollo rockets. Now, they get overshadowed quite a bit by the Mercury 7. And those 7 astronauts went through a lot just to be called astronauts. They went through a lot of psychological and physical experimentation, basically, on them, and then they chose the first 7. And those first 7 were Alan Shepard, Gus Grissom, John Glenn, Deke Slayton, Gordon Cooper, Scott Carpenter, and Wally Schirra. All of those 7 men contributed a lot to NASA in those early years. They were chosen in 1959, and between 1960 and 1963, which was the Mercury plan, they went into space. They ended up going to the first 2 rockets were Al Shepard and Gus Grissom. They both went up into the atmosphere and came back down. And we know that John Glenn eventually was the first one to make a full rotation in orbit around the Earth before coming back down. And then they kept getting more and more complicated. They end up, by the time Gordon Cooper goes up into the atmosphere and does his rotations around the Earth, he's actually doing some experiments in space. This was such a great thing to do. And when I talk about the thing, I'm talking about the space race, because once the Russians had put in Sputnik in 1957, the game was on because of the whole Red Scare was going on, and they felt the importance of we've got to help control space as Americans having to do that. And then we've got a president who, in JFK, after his Bay of Pigs fiasco, had to pivot, and his pivot was NASA and his new frontier. That new frontier was getting a man to the moon, and all of these challenges that either the early astronauts went through or the test pilots went through were for the benefit of the Apollo missions that ultimately put men up on the moon. Have you read this book lately? If not, I definitely recommend checking this book out.